everybody. Okay, so I'm really, really happy today to have two really wonderful guests on the podcast, Bernie Lombardi and Christopher Metz, who I met, like so many people have, over on Instagram. And I will link below their handles on Instagram so you can follow them as well. But they are really fun and really smart. And by the way, you need to follow them strictly to watch their food photos because they have they're big foodies. So you will see them eating all over the New York area. And if they go anywhere else, they're always posting these beautiful pictures, which make me incredibly jealous. So, you guys, welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here to talk about the Booker today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
I kind of view you two as the literary power couple of Instagram.
We will
because there's not a lot of you. There really isn't. Who's I don't know that on any book platform that I've seen, frankly. So I love that. You have very interesting and very varied tastes. It's very eclectic. I think your book reading. Is there a lot you guys differ on in terms of your tastes, or do you align on more?
There's some authors
Yeah,
that we stick to.
I'd say it's like 50-50.
Yeah.
Krista, I think, reads more broadly, maybe, in
Yeah,
genre-wise.
Yeah, I explore more genre, but that's probably because when I started getting into reading, in high school and in grad school and college, I was kind of more into like YA fantasy. So I've always had like a spot for that, whereas Bernie never really explored that genre. So he's less familiar or less inclined to go that route. But I still venture towards that sometimes.
Do you still read it?
Sometimes, yeah. But not very often.
Okay, so I also know that you guys are big book award fans and you follow them very closely.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Booker your favorite?
Definitely.
I would say yes. Booker, but the National Book Award, like, we've gotten more into the National Book Award in the past, like, 2-3 years. But I would say, like, I started Bookstagram because I was getting into the Booker and liked how everybody was talking about it. And so, yeah, that's...
And how long ago was that?
Like 2018. Like, I had always like knew of the Booker and like kind of like followed who won, but in 2018 I was like, I want to read all these books, and then saw people talking about it on YouTube.
I remember I was at a Starbucks actually on a break from work, and Bernie had texted me, "Oh, look at this prize list for books. We should try to explore it this year." And he was like, "Pick your favorite like 2 or 3 and we'll order them." And I picked Milkman, and I think everything under from that year's list. And Milkman actually ended up winning, and that was my first read of that year. And now it's like one of my favorite books of all time.
Wait, where did you guys meet?
On Bumble, which is like Tinder, and I was living in Jersey City and he was living in Manhattan.
Yeah. And he actually kind of lied. I didn't know he was in Jersey. It just popped up on my like location that he was in the city. So I was like, "Oh, I'll meet this guy." And then once we got on our first date, he was like, "Oh, I actually live in Jersey."
And did it go down for you at that point?
No, it's fine. I was already enraptured, so.
And so was book something you immediately started talking about? Was that like a first?
Yeah, kind of. Bernie was doing his were you working on your PhD at that time? Yeah, he was working on his PhD, so he wasn't reading as much for pleasure. So he was reading a lot for work. And whereas I was on the opposite, so I was just reading for pleasure all the time. And I think Bernie got a little jealous because I would be like, "Oh, I just finished this book, and I finished this book." And he was like, I need to get back to that, because he always had read for pleasure prior to starting a PhD. And then so that's how it kind of went.
Got it. Do you guys think that, because I've noticed this, and I'm just curious with especially on the Bookstagram world, that there has been an increase in the enthusiasm for these awards? It seems to grow every year.
Absolutely. I think like it's like slowly trickled. When I came on Bookstagram, I actually was when I decided I wanted to be a Bookstagrammer, it was because I was really into BookTube, because all the BookTubers were talking about the book prizes, but I didn't really want to commit to that because that was a lot of work. So I like started doing Bookstagram, and I feel like that's like right around when it started to become a big thing on Bookstagram. So slowly, but in recent years, it's like kind of like blown up.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell just based on the awards marketing budgets. Like they each year they do something bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can tell that there's momentum each year, that more so than they had the previous years.
Yeah, it literally just used to be like, here's a stack of books.
Yeah.
And now it's become, I love when they have the actors that read
Totally.
passages and then interpret it. And it's so brilliant. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's really become a thing and it's fun to watch. It's also just fun. And again, it's why I wanted you guys on here today, just so we could talk about these, because there's so much passion about not only what makes the long list, but then of course, you know, on the 16th when the short list comes out, there'll be people screaming about
Of course.
what did and didn't make it. And I love that people are so, it feels like even more than like, you know, the Academy Awards or something. They're much more invested in this. It's in a much different thing. Were there any books that you guys thought were going to be on the list that didn't make it?
Definitely.
I mean, the big one for me is probably Intermezzo, the new Sally Rooney, because I love that book. But I also heard that like maybe, I don't know, she didn't want to be on the list, or also like she's so
scandal.
I kind of told you.
Well, she's so big that like you know, maybe her publisher wanted to try to highlight other books because they only have a certain amount of submissions. So you know, and Intermezzo is going to do good, you know, do well no matter what. So.
Yeah, no, it absolutely will. Especially when I was reading the other day that what FSG was like, you know, these events are happening all over. You know, it was like it felt like the days of Harry Potter, which is like, you know, is the store staying open until midnight for the new Sally Rooney?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like even my daughter, who is not much of a reader, which kills my soul. She last year at camp, she came home and she was like, "Oh my God, Papa, I read this book and it was so amazing." And I was like, "All right, Coho, what is it?" And she was like, "It's called Normal People." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, if this is the baseline, if we're starting with this, there are so many places we could go. I can give you so many lists. So it was very exciting for me. I thought Praiseworthy could really end up on there.
Definitely.
Despite the fact I hadn't read it yet, but I did buy it under the assumption that I'm like, oh, this is going to get on. And everybody was talking about it as like one of them. And then the other thing that I thought could get on was Caledonian Road.
Okay.
Which I've been reading for like the past, you know, 2 months. And it's interesting because now that I'm almost through it, I was like, I now don't think it would have been a part of that. It doesn't feel like it would have been a part of that list. It's a great book, but I don't know necessarily part of it. And the last one I thought, and I don't know if you guys read Glorious Exploits.
Mm-mm. Chris wants to read that, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and that was
super high on my TBR.
That's the other one that I thought would get there.
I was also hoping for Blackouts by Justin Torres. It didn't make it, but that's okay. He already won the National Book Award, so
he's doing
good.
well.
He's set.
Okay, so what I would love to do is I just want to go through the books. We don't have to even spend so long on them, but just to say what you thought. I'd also love to know if you think that particular book is going to make the shortlist or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
cool?
yeah. So yeah,
and we have them right in front of us, so we're ready.
Just to like say before we even start it that, I mean, in my opinion, this is a very strong list. So it's like really hard to decide what is actually going to be on the short list. So just like, you know, if I end up saying like, oh, that could be on the short list to 10 out of 13.
I think it's completely speculative. And I was going through them last night and there's a difference a little bit between what I'd love to see on the list necessarily and what could be on the list are two different things for me. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is all just kind of shits and giggles, having fun, and you know, and we'll see what happens.
And I also will say we've read the whole list, but we haven't individually read the whole list just yet.
Okay, and so this is good because I have not either. Because the only one I was trying like mad last night to get through the Claire Massoud, and I have 80 pages left. So I have a Creation Lake. That's a whole other conversation I'll have with you, which I've gotten halfway through. And then I've not started the Richard Powers. That's the only one that I have not touched yet. So
okay. I've finished 10. I'm halfway through Held and Enlightenment, and I haven't touched Headshot yet.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we have everything covered between the three of us.
Right.
Yes.
Yep, we're good.
All right. Here we go. Have your coffees ready. Okay, so first, My Friends by Hisham Mater. What do we think?
So going into it, that's like was already one of my favorite books of the year. I absolutely loved it. I was obsessed with it and had a inkling that it would be on the list. I have an inkling that it'll be on the short list. I just really, really love it. It made me feel a lot. I loved how it looked at like relationships between, the protagonist and his father and, the different people, his friends and the different relationships he had. And I love that one.
I also really like that one too. And I would put that on the short list. I think we both put it on our individual short lists. Bernie did love it a little more than I did, but I felt like the melancholy and the like sadness like deeply throughout it. So I think that's what resonated most with me.
Well, it's interesting because it was the very first book I read this year, back in January, and I loved it at the time. But it's interesting now as I've gotten through, like this weekend, I read Stone Yard Devotional and then almost through the Masood, and again, it's fascinating having read that so long ago, the kind of way that these books are having conversations with each other. And there's so much about reflection and there's so much about families. And this is one of those books that feels very in that world to me. I agree. I feel like it's probably going to be on the short list, and I'd be thrilled with it because I really thought it was so solid. I really thought it was great.
For sure.
Okay. Number 2, The Safe Keep by Yael van der Wooden.
So I haven't read that one. Bernie has.
Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
I could go first. Sure.
Yeah,
I loved this. My thing was, I said, I read this on a plane, like flying across the country, and I had no idea what I was getting into. And I was completely focused, I was in a capsule 30,000 feet in the air. And like, I don't know, I really, the kind of the trajectory of the book, where it went, I had no idea where it was headed, and not to give anything away, but I found it a really interesting narrative. I don't know that this will make the short list. I would personally be thrilled if it made the short list because I love her and I think she's a really interesting writer. I was also I was really surprised how kind of turned on I was by this lesbian sex. Like, I really was like, what is happening right now? Because it's so sexy. Like I said, because we did an interview, like Jason Blitman and I interviewed her for Gays Reading, and I said, you have done to Pears what Andre Asselman did to Peaches.
Yeah.
And really, the both of you can make the most amazing queer fruit salad. But yeah, I was so like, okay, this is weird, but I'm really turned on right now. So that was my thoughts.
I literally had probably the same exact experience as you, and the same exact opinions. I loved it. It's one that like a lot of people don't love. Like it's very, I would say, split down the middle on who loves it and who doesn't love it. I know that a lot of people who are more familiar with the history, and again, not to give anything away, kind of called what was going to happen early on because they picked up on the little pieces.
Oh, interesting.
But I wasn't familiar with this, and so I had no idea until part 3 started what it was about, and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was so good, and I thought it was well written. A lot of people thought that it was like tidy at the end, but I didn't. I thought that like it left things open for your interpretation.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't know. It was, in fact, to be honest, it could end up being one of my favorite books of the year. I just loved it that much. I just was like, wow, what a debut.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange.
You want to go?
Sure. I enjoyed it. I found myself just comparing it a lot to There There, which I loved. And I didn't love it as much as There There. So I think that hindered my reading of it. I was really into the beginning and part 1. So like the prehistory of There There. And then I kind of got a little sidetracked in part 2 and 3. I still liked it. I thought it was pretty. The writing was beautiful, but yeah, it wasn't necessarily my favorite.
And probably not a shortlister for you.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so I have an interesting relationship with There There. I read it when it first came out, but I was super sick, and because of that, like just like didn't get on with it, but always knew it was like a me thing and not the book. So I reread There before reading this and ended up like really, really liking it and thinking it was really, really good. And then I immediately went into Wandering Stars. And I agree with those who say that it's not, in my opinion, not as good as There. But I still liked it a lot, and I wasn't bothered by the two parts being, it from kind of like feeling like two separate books. I thought it worked. I thought like I liked a lot of the underlying themes. I probably wouldn't put it on my short list, but I could see it being shortlisted.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I read There when it first came out, and I liked There. I wasn't crazy about it like some people were, and so I was almost like going into this. I was almost hesitant, and I was surprised how much I actually liked it, and kind of the historical, like going back, really worked for me, and I ended up liking it more. And I don't know if I would have gone back and read There now if I would have had a different experience with that. So I did really like it. I wouldn't, for me, it wouldn't be on my short list, but I think it's a totally solid novel, and it's one of those things I would totally recommend to people. But yeah, not like that. Mr. Percival Everett and James.
James,
Definitely.
I mean, James is just so good.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's a really special book. It was one I was actually not sure if it was going to be on the Booker just because it's like so American, and I mean that doesn't really mean anything because there are very American novels on the Booker long list. It's not about whether it's American or not. But when I think about it, I think about it as like next year's Pulitzer winner. That's how I have it in my head. So I wasn't necessarily associating it with the Booker, but it makes perfect sense, and I would include it on my short list.
Yeah, same. I would definitely include it. I loved it. I love Percival Everett, so anything he reads, it's an auto. Yeah. Anything he writes, it's an auto buy for us. Auto for sure.
Yeah, that'll be the shock if this doesn't get on the short list. That'll be the scream you hear collectively across Instagram. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. In fact, tonight I have my In Real Life book club, and that was the book that was chosen this month. So my husband read it yesterday. Like he just literally sat down in the library, and then I heard the snap close last night of the book, and he was like, "Well, that was really good." And I was like, "It is. It's so. Oh God, it's great." Okay, Enlightenment by Sarah Paley. This is different, I think, than the cover you guys have. You have the British, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we have the UK cover.
Do you want us to show it?
Yeah, show it.
So Sarah Perry I love Sarah Perry. Read Melmoth and The Essex Serpent by her. And I also loved Enlightenment. It was so beautiful. I was obsessed with the characters. I loved their relationship, although it was fraught at some times. I was so into just the whole vibes of the book. And I know people have said that it's that they don't get along as well with it because it's not as heavy on plot. But I kind of knew that going in. And so I was prepared for it, and I was just there for it. And you're reading it now.
Yeah, I'm reading it now. I'm like page 220 out of 375 or something. So a little over 50%. This is the one that, like, if I had to choose one when the long list was originally revealed, that I was like, I don't really want to read that, it was probably this one, just because, like, I don't know. I just associated it as something that I wouldn't like. Maybe because of the cover. I don't know.
Astronomy.
Yeah, astronomy. I'm not a big science person, and there's a lot of science on this list. And, a lot of people don't like it, or a lot of people find it boring and dense. And so I was kind of worried.
But I told you would like it.
Yeah, you told me I like it. But I actually really like it. I like the themes that are being explored around like queerness and religion and the body, and I like the weird, old, 1800s kind of like voice to the narrative. I think it works. So I like it, and it's one of the ones that I'm like considering putting on my short list, but I'm not sure. I have to finish
You have to finish it.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm with you. I loved it. I loved it. I was there for all the vibes, like you said. Like, I loved these characters. It is a weird thing, and even people who are, when you're talking about the book, because you get into astronomy and you're kind of talking about it, and you're like, and to me, it sounds much more heady than it actually is when you get into it. Because I think it, at its center, it really is like these two characters these two people they're in love with. There's so much character stuff that I just found fascinating. But again, the whole idea of, religion versus spirituality versus science, and what she's playing with, I thought was so fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't know if ultimately like it stuck the landing for me in a way which I was expecting something different by the end, but I can't necessarily fault the book for that. It was just something I was aware of by the end of the book. But for me, I would put this on my short list, and I
Yes.
hope it makes the short list. I just think it's a really interesting book. And
Yeah.
I also really like the
I was
inclusion
just-
of the ghost.
I was just
I
gonna
think
say
it
that.
works.
I was about to say I forgot about the ghost, and I feel like anytime there's like a ghost in a book, for some reason I'm like, oh, I love that ghost.
yeah, well, and it is interesting you said the 18th century thing, and that was the one thing that threw me for a moment, because it did feel like even the sensibilities of, it's kind of people's viewpoints on homosexuality, and it felt like almost something, a drawing room kind of, when I said, like, in one moment she's describing the crinoline of a dress, and then in the next moment someone's pulling out a cell phone, and I was like, wait, it would throw me sometimes, and I had to keep reminding myself, she's from the past, but there are these elements, and just her writing is so rich and beautiful that it does feel like, you're waiting to enter Downton Abbey. But it all worked for me, and I was completely smitten with it. Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I love this cover, by the way. I just think it's beautiful.
It is. Why don't you go first on this one?
Okay, we talked about vibes with Perry, and this was a vibe book for me too, and it worked for me. I know some people were like, there was no real plot, and none of that mattered to me. It was less about, I just felt like it was this incredible meditation on the earth and life and the universe and our place in it. And it was so beautiful to me. Again, I read this one day, we were driving out to the desert, so I read it in one feel clip. And the thing, I don't usually do this, and I feel like I should do it more, because this is a thing that I heard that works for some people with ADHD. I'm not admitting that I have ADHD, but I think I probably do have ADHD. But they said if you listen to music when you read, sometimes it helps immerse and focus. And I did that. I put on this kind of space type and it took me to places, like I was so in it. I was so moved by it. I don't know. I loved it. I don't know that it would make the short list. It's a one that I'm not sure about, but it might make mine. I thought it was, I was completely with it.
It's funny you said meditative, because Bernie, who's going to speak to this next, I haven't read this one yet, but yesterday he read it and he looked at me and he was like, it's just like a meditation.
Yeah, no, I read it yesterday. This was another one with enlightenment that, at face value was about science, about space, and I was like, not my thing. So I saved it to towards the end, but I picked it up and read 90% of it yesterday, and I loved it. It honestly might be my favorite.
Oh, wow.
For a lot of the reasons that you said, for how it looks at, humanity, politics, the earth, borders. I just thought it was really, really well done. I'm definitely including it on my short list, and I'm going to predict it as well.
And both Orbital and Enlightenment, actually, when we went to London for the International Booker ceremony, I picked up at shops and I was like, oh, Bernie, I want these, Enlightenment and Orbital. And he was like, Enlightenment just became one that I didn't end up purchasing, and Orbital became one I didn't end up purchasing, because he was like, that's an American author. Like,
wait, no, those are both English authors. Oh. No, I just said that they sounded boring.
Oh, that's fine.
Like, we don't want those. They'll just take up space.
He was like, it's just too much. It's a big book and that's a small book. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So it ended up, he ended up negotiating me out of those two purchases. So it's just funny.
And now we have that record that, like, he did that. That is so funny. Yeah, oh, Chris, that I'm interested to see what you think of it when you read it.
Yeah, I'm excited. And it's interesting you said the thing about music. I did something similar when I read Pod by, I don't remember the author's name.
William Paul?
Yeah. I listened to like whale sounds while I read that book, and it definitely enhanced the experience. So I'm with you on that.
I don't know that I'd ever go into a next book and be like, okay, what am I going to match this with? Yeah. But for some reason, I was just like, I wanted to, I don't know, it really, I was like, I came out of it and it's like, I felt like I was having this, epiphany moment as I was reading that book. It was so strange. And it's one of those things that because of that experience and like driving to the desert and seeing like the windmills just turning, it's all kind of seared into your head, you know, when you read certain things and you remember exactly where you were when you did that.
Yeah.
All right, Ann Michaels Held.
I'm on page 80, so I don't know much about it, or I don't know enough to say, but I'll just say that the first like 10 pages hurt my brain, and it took me a second to get used to the language, but once I got used to the language, I started to appreciate them.
And Chris, wait, you haven't read it yet? Oh, you did?
I have. I did read Held. I read it. I read 90% on last Sunday, and then didn't pick it up again until like Friday of this past week. And I think that hindered my reading of it because I was almost done. And just because we were so busy, I picked it up so late. And then I was confused when I picked it back up because I was like, oh, I don't remember these characters. But then once I realized that they were actually new characters, it kind of, I figured it all out. I did really enjoy the writing. It was very pretty. She's clearly a poet. That's very clear in all the writing, but I don't remember much about it. I think just because I put it down for so long.
No, it's not because you just put it down. I had the same thing. No, I literally read this, like, again, I was on a plane. I feel like I'm always on a plane. Read it, and like I got through the whole first part of it, and I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is beautiful writing, and I can't tell you anything that it was about. Like I had to go back and look at the beginning again to kind of remember what it was. I didn't even read a review of it because I was like, I really have to dig to remember what it is I just read.
Yeah.
So that wasn't the best sign. So I'm glad you had that experience too, because I really was like, is it me? No. Okay. Blair Massoud, This Strange Eventful History.
So yeah, you've just been reading it, so you go first.
Yeah, it's funny because this is another one where I had heard a lot of people either not liking it or finding it boring or not connecting with it. Now, I've been doing it on audio as well, and I've really been taken with it. I mean, I'm someone who I enjoy a multi-generational story. I enjoy an epic. I enjoy something historical. So all of that has really been working for me. Kind of, it's surprised me how much this family has kind of snuck up on me and kind of captured me. And I'm really kind of invested in all of them to see where they're all going to go and where they're ultimately all going to end up. And I think the writing is beautiful. Sometimes I find it, I don't know if overwritten is the right word, where she gets into a lot of details and she's spitting a lot of names about this aunt and this, which I'm like, I don't, that almost distracts me sometimes. But generally, I don't know, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, we actually both listened to this one as well. And I think that definitely enhanced our reading of it because I'm like you, Brett. I love a family saga. So I love when these deep dives. And what really stuck out to me about this novel in particular is that I haven't read something like a family saga that carries you through the different characters continuously throughout. So a lot of times the sagas that I read, you read a portion from one perspective, then the next, and the next, and the next in generation.
Like through time, over
time.
Yeah.
So this one we get like early on, but then we also so we watch their whole marriage unfold while their kids are growing up, and then it kind of all just keeps going and going. So I felt like it was more immersive.
Like you get all of the characters throughout. Like it's not like, the grandparents
Not
die
pieces,
and then the next generation.
No, yeah. And that's probably what aids to that kind of investment in them because you see not only the impact of these relationships that started in the beginning and long term, but also the effect that has on the kids and their long term. And so it's a really kind of thorough and complete way to kind of stick with these characters. And I think you probably just nailed it as to why people feel very invested by the end. And it's one of those things where I would say to people, push through in the beginning if it's because I do think it's worth it. And I think this could get on the short list.
It's on mine.
This would be another one I'd be a little surprised if it wasn't on the short list, but we'll see.
Yeah, I feel like usually the Booker short list has one of these type of novels, these heavily like researched or saga type books. So I feel like this is definitely their pick.
Right. And then I also saw that, the blurb inside the dust jacket was from Eugen Lee.
Yeah, can't miss that.
So I'm like, well, we'll see. She's like, I have my first. All right. Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood.
Chris hasn't read that yet.
Okay.
I read it. I really, really, really liked it. I hate mice.
He hates them.
I absolutely hate mice.
There's fear.
So there were a lot of moments throughout the book where I wanted to vomit, literally, because the writing about mice is so descriptive that it just gave me
It was
chills.
the plague of your nightmares.
Yeah, it's the worst
Yeah.
chills possible.
I can confirm I was sitting next to him and he put his hand to his mouth while he was reading it. And I was like, is it really that bad? He was like physically reacting to it.
That being said, I love a book about nuns.
He loves them.
I love a book about nuns. I mean, I went to Catholic school my entire life, so anytime nuns come into
Was that a good experience?
Yeah, so I didn't have
It wasn't traumatic.
No, I didn't have a traumatic Catholic school.
Okay.
But I really liked it. It's one of the ones that's on the cusp for me, maybe shortlist, maybe not. It's right around 5, 6, 7, 8 kind of, I would say.
This again was another one that completely surprised me. I had no idea. And even when I started it, I'm like, am I going to like this? Because again, which was like many of these books, it's very interior. That's the crux of this book. But I ended up really loving it. And I found myself that last 90 pages, I was so moved and repeatedly moved. I found myself, I kept choking up. And I loved what she was saying. I loved the ideas that she was putting forth. I would love to see this on the short list. It was one of my favorites of the group so far.
I think that although they're very different, so based on what I know so far, and the writing is very, very different, I would maybe put it held and be one or the other will make the short list.
I think you're right. I get that totally. I get that.
I've predicted my short list, but I haven't read it from what I've heard.
All right. Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. I'll start on this one. And here's my thing. I was watching everybody go crazy for this book. And so I was really excited to start. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the time that I read it. And I'm absolutely going to go back and finish it. I got 46% in. And I just was like, good God, the Neanderthals. This is what I felt. I kept thinking, I feel really dumb. That's what I kept thinking. I feel really dumb. I haven't made the connection yet. I haven't correlated it all. I haven't brought it all together. And I kept thinking, this is going to come. If you keep going, it's all going to make sense. And I have determined and I decided that if this makes the short list, and I think it will personally make the short list, then I'm going to go back and finish it.
I think it'll make the short list too. I feel like I hear what you're saying, and I'm not sure that you will be satisfied in the end. If you're looking for those things to come together. I
want closure and everyone to be happy.
I don't know if that'll happen. While I was reading it, really, really liked it, even though there were parts that were a little boring. Sometimes of the emails, I was like, oh, not another email. But I really, really liked it. But since time has passed since I finished it, I actually find that I like it less.
Oh,
I don't not like it. like it. I still like it a lot. But I thought I loved it, but I don't think I do.
Interesting.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. And I really liked Sadie, the main character, her humor. I thought she was witty and funny, however, also clumsy, and thought she was this great spy, but in reality, she was kind of not, which you find as you progress through the novel. I also think it was fun how Kushner kind of made her also objectify women in times, classic spy novels are all about, from the male perspective, the male gaze on the woman.
Sure.
And kind of took her own gaze on other women and herself, which was a fun twist. I actually loved the Neanderthals part. However, the other emails not dedicated to the Neanderthals, I would be like, oh, I skipped through these. I want to know more about these Neanderthals. But yeah, I don't know if it connects in the end. If it does, if you're dumb, we're idiots. So
no, I'm glad to hear that, because I literally was sitting there and thinking, what is wrong with me? Because everyone was like, oh my God, it's amazing, and this is the one, and I was like, the one of what? I don't know.
And the end is all history.
It might be one that's good on a reread, which is what the Booker's all about. Is a book that can stand a reread.
Sure, and I think they read them what did they say,
Three
like
times.
3 or 4 times before they're done. So yeah, so for them, certainly. Headshot, let's
Headshot.
say.
I haven't read. That's the one I
By
haven't.
Rita Bowling.
That's all, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, I love this one. This might be my favorite so far. I was so obsessed with it. So the structure is these 8 young women going into this tournament, the American Young Women's Boxing League. I don't remember the exact title. And each section is broken down into like a fight between 2 women. And then whoever wins progresses, and you go through the semifinals and final match. And I was obsessed with it. I read it in like 2 days. It's kind of stream of conscious, and each fight goes in and out of the 2 women fighting. It just like blurs the line, and it gives you their past, and it also gives you their future, and it also gives you what they're feeling in the moment. But yeah, I loved it. It was all about like the women's body, and I think I've seen people say it's a little repetitive. However, I would argue that that was her goal, because it's reflecting like boxing. Boxing's repetitive, and also these are young women trying to figure themselves out. So maybe they have like this, they don't really know who they are just yet. So get that vibe a lot, but I loved it.
Yeah, I liked it okay. And I'm one of those people who said the repetitive thing. I thought, like, I marveled at the structure of it as I was going through it. I kept thinking, this is so smart and it is so clever. Even everything you described about the book, I thought was spot on. What was interesting for me, and what I started to feel a little bit, was part of it was the repetitiveness. I begin to get the girls mixed up a little bit, and I think at one point they have very similar names. I think they're sisters, and it's like literally like Liesel and Lisa, or something to that effect. And I was like, wait, which is which? I think the other thing, because as you know, for people who have not read it, with each girl that wins, she goes on to the next round, so you have the final 2, and every person, every girl that I picked to win lost. I mean, literally, I'd be like, oh, I like her. I hope she wins.
Yeah.
Lost. And then I started to try to figure her out and think like, I was like watching a television show, like when you're watching a reality show and thinking, who are they going to pick? They're just playing with it. So I started to try to second guess the author, to think like, well, which one is she going to give it to? And so I don't know if that colored my experience, because I got through and I was like, oh man, I really just, I mean, yes, I lost a lot of money just now. So, yeah, but I did appreciate it in terms of structure a lot. And I have thought about it in hindsight a lot too. I just didn't know if it resonated enough with me when I read it. Okay, Wild Houses by Colin Barrett.
Wild Houses.
I haven't read this one.
This was the first one I read after finding out about the long list. Actually, yeah. And as it's a debut, he's written 2 short story collections before, but this is his debut novel. The guy can write. His sentences are phenomenal. His writing is really, really great. It's a novel that like doesn't really have a main character. It has a set of characters that are all significant to what's happening. And I thought it did a really, really great job at giving us so many well-developed 3-dimensional characters. I thought that was really strong. I think the only thing that like took away from its wow factor is that the story was like, okay, like, like it was a nice story, like, or nice, I don't know if nice is the right word, but like it was a good story, but not a story that like I'm gonna remember for the rest of it.
I agree 100%. To be honest with you, it felt like not that different from parts of the first season of Slow Horses, the Apple TV series, like, which are also based on books. The one thing I did expect for this list, because we've always had it in the past, is more Irish writers. And Irish writers, to me, I know you guys were just in Ireland, and like the Irish are just like, I don't know what they put in the water, or just years of inherited trauma, but they're my favorite. So many of my favorite authors. So I was almost expecting a different book than this one, and I liked it a lot. And he was part of, I don't know if you guys ever look at that. Granta puts out a list every year of 10 new authors to watch, and I've read almost all of that list, and they're all such good books. But this surprised me a little bit. And again, thought it was interesting, thought it was a different, interesting character study, but not the best for me. but still a totally solid book. Okay, I think we're on to the last, which is
Yeah.
Playground by Richard Powers. And I will say, this is the one I have not read. And part of my reticence to reading it is because this is the one I've heard the most negative about. And I think some of it's not even necessarily the substance. I think a lot of it is kind of the BIPOC representation or the writing. Again, and I haven't read any of it, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah, Chris. Chris is reading it now.
Yeah,
You like
I'm
it?
halfway through. Yes, I'm enjoying it. And I get what people are saying about that representation. I don't know exactly what it's doing just yet. So I'm only halfway through. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I'm wondering if there's a point.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's one of my favorites.
I
Absolutely.
love hearing this.
I absolutely loved it. There are certain elements of the criticism that I understand, and there are certain elements of the criticism that I believe come from not understanding what the book is doing. So it's a book that you don't understand what's going on until you get to the last however many pages. You're like, oh shit, that's what it's doing, or like, is that what it's doing? And then I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of people to talk to about it, because I buddy read it with a couple people, and that really helped. Here's the thing: it's interrogating whiteness. In order to do that, it shows a certain white, very privileged character's perspective, and that's uncomfortable to read. And so I understand why somebody wouldn't want to read that. But for me, I think that white authors need to interrogate whiteness, and so I'm not like against it, and I think it's done in the right way. And so yeah, that's what I think. And I think it's really good. Yeah.
I know, I love all that, and actually hearing you talk about it has made me now excited to read it, because again, had not really heard anything. You know, I years ago started the Overstory and heard so many things about that, and I could not get into it, and it felt like a book that I would have loved, but I started to say it's so dense about trees. I think I was being, so obvious.
This has dense moments. It does have dense
dense.
moments.
But there's something about the ocean and
Right.
that world that is more appealing to me, because I love that whole thing, and I'm obsessed with octopus, and somehow I feel like that's going to be more the thing. But hearing you just explain all that and talk about it already feels like it's more of an entry point that's a little more palatable than before, which, now I'm kind of like, and again, I'll just say this feels like something that's going to be on the short list. So
I think so too.
I don't know that we've collectively put a short list together. I think we've just said what we think.
Mhm.
I just am so curious, and this is just without even thinking, let's just take just a crazy stab. What do you think will take home the prize? I'll go first, and I'll just say
I
James.
say My Friends or Orbital.
I think it will be Enlightenment.
I could
I
see
love this.
I could see being
four of
any
them.
4 of these.
By the way, I'm going to say I would be happy with any of those, and if all 4 of those are on the short list, and I'm thrilled. Like, I don't care. This is the first time where I have enough of these books where I'd be like, yeah, I'd be happy with a lot of this. The year The Colony did not make the short list, I wanted to kill myself. But there's a lot on this list. I feel like this is a very accessible list for people who normally wouldn't read the Booker. I don't think it's an intimidating list. I don't think it's overly heady. I feel like all the narratives are kind of engaging and bring you in, and they're very varied in their individuality, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, for sure. And but they're all like varied on an individual sense, but then there also are things that you can tell the jury's interested in. Like, there's a lot of books. Do you know Annie?
Oh yeah, Annie from up north. Annie.
Yes, yeah, from Oregon. She something that she said is that like a lot of these books are books that like lead you somewhere, and then there's like a turning point that like changes how you see things, and then takes it from there. Like they like a twist. The judges like a twist.
They like
Annie's many books. That's
Annie's many books. Yeah.
Well, you guys, this was so fantastic. I so appreciate you kibitzing with me and just talking some about this. I find it and the whole thing increasingly, like the rest of the book community, more interesting every year and more invested every year. And so I think it's really fun. And like I said, I love the discourse. I love the intelligent conversations that people are having about this. Just the fact that people are talking about books at all in this capacity in a world right now where, or at least say in the US right now, where things are being banned and everything else. I just think it's so amazing. But again, I so appreciate you guys taking the time to do this on your
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Sunday.
We will always talk books. That's what we do.
Thank you again to Christopher and Bernie for joining me. And as a reminder, all the books talked about today are available for purchase on my bookshop.org page. So be sure to check that out. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all soon.